evening. This is Justin Ford for From the Front Line. Tonight we will be discussing the LA riots and the war between Israel and Iran. In the studio with me is Dr. Peter Hammond, the founder of Frontline Fellowship, who has been involved in serving persecuted Christians for over 40 years in 38 countries. Dr. Hammond, you have just returned from a mission to America. What were you doing there?
Well, I was visiting our friends such as World Missionary Press and involved in a lot of the activities there that are supplying millions of gospel booklets for ourselves and for the missions that we seek to serve. Also many church services, midweek Bible studies, mission rallies, media interviews, radio and TV. So I learned a lot, I traveled a lot and was able to communicate what's going on in Africa in general, persecuted church in particular. Speaking up also, there's a lot of interest to find out what's really going on in South Africa. There's been so much disinformation and so much media noise. So I was frequently getting interviews on South Africa, not only Africa in general. So it was a very interesting, worthwhile time, along with these explosions going on literally in Los Angeles and between Israel and Iran.
In the scripture, we are told to understand the times. What do you understand about the riots in Los Angeles and other parts of the United States?
Well, it seemed to me to be another round of the Antifa, BLM, burn, loot, murder kind of undermining of society, which, of course, the globalist and New World Order crowd are really after. And this is particularly protesting about America trying to reestablish its sovereignty and expel the illegal aliens who poured in by the millions during the Biden-Harris misadministration from 2020 to 2024. So as they're trying to expel these rioters and looters and illegal aliens, many of them criminals and some of them terrorists, it's understandable there would be some resistance because some of these people involved in drug cartels and criminal activities, and there's a lot of vested interest to probably keep them in. But we heard that a lot of these were paid rioters, where they're literally being paid huge amounts of money that you couldn't earn legally, just to be there and to throw rocks. And you can actually see some of these characters breaking up pavements and throwing chunks of rocks and concrete at passing vehicles, and not only police vehicles, but also at normal civilians passing by. Very dangerous. People are going to get killed in all this. So it looks like another round of the Antifa, BLM, destabilize society. And in this case, it's particularly trying to intimidate the US government into no longer expelling these illegal aliens who've invaded their country.
You were in America as the conflict between Israel and Iran escalated last week. How did your contacts in America understand the conflict?
Well, many used words like tragic and unnecessary, and often the reaction was, not again. And they are so sick of these forever wars, these worthless, no-win wars. And, of course, Donald Trump's America First mega movement, Make America Great Again, was built to a large extent upon a promise of no more of these useless foreign wars. And so I think the general attitude was, this is completely ridiculous, unacceptable. How dare anyone in Washington think about dragging us into another war? And this is not our war, and we shouldn't be involved. And the people bring up all the lies that were told to get America involved in previous wars, starting with the Spanish-American War back in 1898, and it was meant to be Remember the Maine, which now the Maine was an American battleship that was visiting Havana Harbor, and it blew up. And at the time they blamed Spain and used it as a pretext to get involved in the war. Since then it's come to be understood as a false flag that in fact the Americans blew up their own ship. And Remember the Maine was very much a propaganda operation. They remember how they were lied to get them involved in the First and the Second World War, and the Gulf of Tonkin incident to get involved in the Vietnam War. They remember the weapons of mass destruction that Secretary of State Colin Powell testified before Congress and on the UN. that we have credible evidence, weapons of mass destruction. Iraq's planning to invade the world, kill millions, and they've got atom bombs, they've got huge stocks of gas, and later on it all turned to be lies. And so there's this belief that we've been subjected for years now to propaganda about Iran is building an atom bomb and Iran's about to nuclear annihilate Israel, and we're going to have another world war, and over and over and over. And so the people today are less likely to believe this than they were the other lies that they were quick to believe in. Just one example is Tucker Carlson, who said when the Iraq War broke out in 2003, he was part of Fox News and he was promoting the Iraq War enthusiastically. And he said he'll never again do that. He just looks back at it that I was fooled and I was foolish and I was wrong and I shouldn't have believed all this propaganda. And so there's people there, Steve Bannon and others who were major influences in the past who have now said they recognize the pattern of propaganda and they're not interested in getting involved in this, and they think this could destroy America if America gets involved in this. And they not just because Iran is a pretty powerful nation with huge amounts of resources to bring into this war, and not just that, it's that the American people themselves are so convinced they've been lied to repeatedly for generations, and they're sick of it, and they don't see the point of America getting involved in these forever wars again. And that this was a major reason why so many millions voted for Donald Trump, because he is promising no more wars. And they're sick of these wars, and there's just this attitude of, we have been dragged into this, and they always cost a fortune. The last big lie, the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, cost over $1 trillion to America. More than 1 million lives were lost in Iraq, in the so-called liberation, and it destroyed the Christian church in Iraq. Iraq had one of the largest numbers of Christians in the Middle East, 1.6 million Christians before America invaded. Today, it's not even 100,000 left. And so that was almost a genocide of the Christians in Iraq, some of them dating back to the 1st century. And there's this attitude that, we have wrecked the world with our involvement in foreign wars, and we should go back to the advice of our first president, George Washington: beware of entangling alliances and do not get involved in Europe's wars. And so in this case, this is Middle East wars, but the same principle. So generally speaking, I saw that there was a lot of outrage, frustration, grief, and anguish, that it looked like America's about to get sucked inexorably into this Middle Eastern conflict.
So in your view, do you see this as an inevitable war or an unnecessary war?
Definitely an unnecessary war. There's nothing inevitable about wars. Wars are normally chosen. And of course, the propagandists would like you to believe these are inevitable. There's nothing we can do. We have a duty or whatever it is. And that's part of the propaganda, to suck people into it. And we've seen by analysis of the lies given. Bear in mind that old adage, the first casualty in war is truth.
Many people are claiming that Iran is a rogue state and needs to be destroyed. What do you understand about the history behind this conflict?
Well, bear in mind that Iran was once Persia and it was once a stable and neutral country. In the Second World War, Iran was invaded first by Great Britain and then by America to create a conduit in order to transport across the country by rail weapons of war for the Soviet Union to save Joseph Stalin's communist regime from being overthrown. And yes, some went up through the Murmansk Arctic Circle convoys, and some came from Alaska, mostly being flown across from Alaska into Siberia. But most of the aid for the Soviet Union was taken through Iran. And even though Iran was neutral at the time of the war, Britain and America cheerfully invaded them, violated their neutrality, in order to save the Soviet Union, which turned out to be one of the worst governments in the history of the world, one of the biggest mass murderers. And Iran later had a coup d'etat organized called Operation Ajax, a joint British MI6, American CIA operation where they toppled the government, assassinated, overthrew the elected representatives of the country in order to install a puppet government so that it would make better deals with the oil companies. So there's a history of interfering in the country, the worst, of course, being under Jimmy Carter. President Jimmy Carter betrayed the Shah of Iran. One of his high priorities in his foreign policy was to betray the American ally, stable American ally, stabilizing, modernizing force in the Middle East. The Shah of Iran had modernized and industrialized Iran, and Iran was in many ways one of the most stable forces in the Middle East. And President Jimmy Carter destabilized it in 1976 to 1980, culminating in 1979 revolution of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard under the Ayatollah Khomeini. So, yes, Iran right now is a very hostile country, but it's because of US foreign policy, which has invaded them, destabilized them, organized coup d'etats, and directly betrayed them into the hands of these radicals. So if there's a problem in Iran, it's from foreign intervention already, which has aggravated it, and any more foreign intervention is only going to aggravate it more. Iran used to be one of America's best allies in the Middle East, and they were betrayed. And I think people need to remember that about this history.
What is the religious and spiritual situation in Iran?
Well, now that we should turn to Operation World for. And Operation World informs us Iran is overwhelmingly Islamic, of course, but mostly Shia Islamic. And it's worthwhile noticing that the Shiites, they are sort of like the Roman Catholics, if you could put it that way, of Islam. The Sunnis are more like the Protestants in the sense that the Sunnis are what the Quran says. The Shiites are more like Catholics. It's more important what the Ayatollahs say, what the religious leaders say. So Shia religion, or the Shiites in Iran, are overwhelmingly under the control of the Ayatollahs. And so it's a very top-down hierarchical structure, and they are by far the majority. So the situation is 98% of Iran claims to be Muslim, 98%. And that figure is going down because, interestingly enough, they've got a few religious minorities. There are the Christians who have been growing. Very interesting about the people coming to Christ in Iran. There are many Christians in Iran. Back before the revolution in 1979, there were less than 500 Muslim background believers in Iran. Now there are in the millions. And I've heard estimates ranging from 2-3 million up to 6 million. I don't know how many Christians are in Iran. That's not our field. But Operation World says they're well over 1 million at this stage. And notice that there are Christians in Iran, historic Christians, mainly the Armenians and the Assyrians. Armenian Christians, not meaning Armenian as in the denomination, but Armenian as in the people who live up in Armenia, where the Ark of Noah ended. But people are coming to Christ in huge numbers in Iran, mainly amongst the young people, interestingly enough. Iran's young population is particularly dissatisfied with the government, in many ways feeling sidelined, and they feel ostracized. They are, in many cases, scandalized by the disgusting behavior of the Ayatollah government. And so the receptivity amongst the Christians, amongst the local young people, is huge. Bear in mind, Iran's also where the Baha'is began. The Baha'is are a universalist type religion where they believe all religions lead to God, and they're considered as a cult and as heretical and apostates in Iran. So Baha'is are very heavily persecuted. There are quite a lot of Persian-speaking Jews in Iran, and many of them are descendants from those exiled to Babylon 2,700 years ago. And they have got a huge impact amongst the people too, and the government disproportionately. But the Christians are tolerated if they are Assyrian or Armenian. But by definition, a Persian or an Iranian must be Muslim. And so all Persian or Farsi-speaking Iranians are considered apostates if they're Christians. But that hasn't stopped many Farsi-speaking Muslims turning to Christ. And so you've also got the Kurdish people, especially up in the northwest of the country, And they face a lot of persecution, not because they are Kurds, as much as because many of them are Sunni Muslim, which is considered heretical in the eyes of the Shiite government. But also many Kurds are coming to Christ, but also just because they're Kurds means they're a ethnic minority who should have their own country, really. The Kurds could form a country as big as Iraq, but the Kurds have been divided between Turkey, Iraq, and Iran, and Syria. There's also some in Syria. But the Kurds have been badly treated over the years because if they're united, they could become a substantial country. In the Bible, the Kurds are the same as the Medes. So the Medo-Persian Empire, it was Darius the Mede who put Daniel, for example, in the lion's den. So there is persecution of the church in Iran. It's quite severe. There's a lot of persecution of the Baha'is. The Christians are tolerated if they are one of the ethnic minorities like the Assyrians or the Armenians. But because so many Persians are coming to Christ, or Farsi-speaking Iranians, they are treated as apostates. And so there's very violent persecution. According to Sharia law, every man who apostatizes from Islam is subject to death penalty. And yet that has not stopped hundreds of thousands, up to millions of people in Iran turning to Christ in recent years. And that has been since the Iranian Revolution. So it seems that what man meant for evil, God is using for good. And even in this terrible situation in Iran since the revolution of 1979 and the betrayal by Jimmy Carter's America, Christians in Iran are on the increase. And if this continues at the present state, Christians could become the majority. In other words, Iran could become a majority Christian country well before the end of the century. By 2070 or earlier, Christians will probably be the majority in Iran. So I think it would be a tragedy for us to target a country for war that has such a strong growing Christian population. It would be good for us to think in terms of maybe we can win this war with Iran if we think we're at war with them at all, in a spiritual sense rather than a military. Let the gospel do its work in Iran. And these people who are talking about, nuke Baghdad, and I hear intemperate things. There are, unfortunately, a certain type of American who believe in any war and that it's patriotic to support every war, no matter what the cause, wherever it is, even if they can't find a place on the map.
What are the implications of this war for missionary work in the Middle East?
Dire, catastrophic, because, whenever a foreign country gets involved in the Middle East, it, of course, rises the local people's nationalism and their sense of resentment against the West. And bear in mind, in the Muslim Middle East, they generally look at Western nations like the United States or Britain as Christian. Of course, historically, Britain has been very Christian. Historically, the United States has been very Christian. And the United States is still mostly Christian today, interestingly. So if there's anything done by, for example, Britain is mobilizing the RAF into the Middle East to threaten Iran because they perceive it's got something to do with them. I don't know why. But if the British or Americans do anything, the locals are going to perceive it as this is what Christians have done. And then what happens is the local Coptic or Assyrian Christians get in the neck. And because the people can't reach those American drones or those cruise missiles or whatever, so they take it out on some poor local Christian thinking, you're all part of the same movement, aren't you? Christians bombed us so we can take it out on you. So it's always catastrophic. Just take Iran as an example, that American military intervention and invasion of Iran resulted in the loss of 1.5 million Christians. We have seen the church in Iran, in Iraq, go from 1.6 million down to 100,000. So it's catastrophic when America gets involved. When they got involved in the Arab Spring, which now we know was funded and organized by USAID, the result was millions of Christians fled the Middle East or were persecuted or killed or chased out. And so the situation before the Arab Spring, which Obama's State Department under Hillary Clinton sponsored, funded, organized, incited, supported, there were 15 million Christians in the Middle East in 2010. the Arab Spring occurred in 2011. And by 2015, it had deteriorated the situation that we only had 10 million Christians left in the Middle East. We've gone from 15 million to 10 million because of US meddling in the Middle East through the Arab Spring. And we could also say through sponsoring and funding ISIS and Al-Qaeda, which caused untold havoc, and they particularly took things out on Christians. So, yeah, the implications for missionary work in the Middle East could be catastrophic. And many people will be persecuted there just because they're Christians. But if one happens to be an American missionary, you can imagine an American missionary in the Middle East, and I know a few, some of which have worked with our mission, they would find their work immensely harder because the hostility against a country that might be bombing you or bombing a fellow Muslim country. You don't have to be an Iranian to resent when America comes in and bombs Iran or whatever may happen. So I'd say the work of missions is definitely at risk, which is why the Bible commands us to pray for peace, that we might be able to advance the work of the gospel without hindrance. And unfortunately, we've got to recognize that wars are going to have all kinds of side effects, unintended consequences. And in particular, just like you can see the American invasion of Iraq back in 2003 was devastating for the Christian community in Iraq. I believe any kind of war in the Middle East that America gets involved in will be very catastrophic for missions and for the church in the Middle East, but particularly, of course, in Iran.
From your travels and contacts in the United States, Dr. Hammond, what are the opinions of those Christians you discussed this situation with?
Well, most of them are saying there's the deep state in America has these warmongers deeply entrenched, and when they speak about the deep state, there is a very deep state in probably most countries in the world. But there's something about the military-industrial complex in America where it doesn't matter what the war, they're going to support it, and they've got their agents in the news media who will promote it. I mean, just think right now that one of the most popular films in recent years has been this Top Gun Maverick, which is a very well-made film with Tom Cruise in it. Apparently the most successful film Tom Cruise has ever been involved in. He's been involved in a lot of successful films. This is one of the most successful films in history. It made $1.4 billion at the box office. Now, the film's basically about American Air Force, actually naval aviators to be more precise, naval Air Force bombing a nuclear facility in the Middle East, which is thinly disguised, but it's obviously talking about Iran. And even geographically, even the symbols on the sides of the planes inside Iran are plainly Iranian. So they're not even hiding the fact that they are popularized the idea of bombing Iran. And this film is very well made and made with the full cooperation of the United States Navy. And you can see why. I mean, they actually were having recruitment desks and recruitment videos preceding the showing of these films in the popular cinemas, because it's a real rousing, inspiring, well-made, inspiring music type of film. But the whole focus of it is bombing a nuclear facility in Iran. And plainly, this is an example of how Hollywood's doing its part to whip up people in the popular culture in the most effective way it can, to think this is a good idea. I've heard so many churches talking about it, that, bombing Iran's critical and we've got to get in there and we should be at war with Iran and we can't let them get a nuclear weapon. But then there's other Americans saying, we've heard this all before. This is warmongers, this is propaganda, this is dragging us into another forever war. And this is not what we voted for. We voted against this in the last elections, and that this principle of keep us out of these foreign wars is critical. So what I was hearing all over was general frustration that the deep state seems to be able to drag Americans to war at this time again. And America's not directly involved yet, but there's a very strong danger that they could get sucked into it. And obviously, many people are saying this is the case of the tail wagging the dog. Israel is running United States foreign policy. And so there was this idea that the state of Israel likes to get the Americans to act as their mercenaries to do their dirty work. And quite a few were saying, Israel's got this phenomenal army and air force. massive amounts of foreign aid, let them fight their own wars. If they want to fight Iran, let it be on them. We shouldn't get involved. But somehow or another, there's a tremendous amount of pressure. You don't have to look far to see how many radio talk show hosts, how many TV stations, how many programs are egging on America to get involved in this war. And when I was in Florida, there was even some mindless idiot who, I'm sorry to say, is a Republican congressman, who was saying that America should nuke Gaza. For goodness sakes, is there anything left to nuke anyway? The place is one big rubble site, and it's been reduced by conventional weapons to rubble. What on earth is the point? But this is the kind of idiocy, and this is an elected representative. And there's this kind of mindless mentality from some people. I distinctly remember being in the United States in 2013 when I was at a tea party, which is taxed enough already, TA, such as resistance to Obama's administration. And Obama wanted to bomb Syria at that stage. And here were these hyper-conservative American Republicans saying, don't you agree we should bomb Syria? And I said, no, I don't. Can you find Syria on the map? And the guys couldn't. But they still wanted to bomb it. And this is deeply distressing. There's a certain kind of people who, I don't know whether they've been whipped up by the news media, the entertainment industry, or dumbed down by the indoctrination nonsense in the so-called schools. But for whatever reasons, there's a bunch of people in America who consider themselves conservative and Christian, who support any kind of bombing campaign anywhere, and think you're unpatriotic if you don't support it. And you can say, this is idiotic. Point to us to one war the United States has been involved in the last century that made the world a better place. And, it's very hard to do so, because it's provable that whenever they've gotten involved, they've made things worse. And I know that that's not considered patriotic. There's a lot of people who want to say, we saved the world, really, by handing over Eastern Europe to Stalin and so on. But the amount of times that the United States intervention has had unintended catastrophic consequences. But of course, there are those who've always benefited. The people who make the planes and the bombs and the missiles and so on, they do very well, thank you. But then there's the families who provide the young people who end up in body bags and buried in Arlington Cemetery, and it's not much of a positive for them, is it? Not to mention the millions of collateral damage in the fields. I mean, can you imagine more than 1 million Iraqis died in the so-called, Operation Iraqi Freedom? Freedom, indeed. The country is much worse off now than it was before. And yet they exaggerated the situation under Saddam Hussein in order to justify bombing and burning and destroying and looting. And the situation is catastrophic in Iraq. And it's hard to believe that the situation in Iran could be made much worse than now, but it can be, definitely. And it's just very sad and tragic to think that there's anyone wanting to follow this line of, we have to get involved. And this is the way propaganda works. It's inevitable, and they just push you along, and, you've got to do it. It's a matter of duty and honor, and if we don't, the whole world's in danger. We've heard this before, and I don't know if we want to follow this again.
Is there a political or a military solution to these seemingly intractable conflicts in the Middle East?
I would say categorically no. There's no military solution to the Middle East problems. I believe this is a missionary challenge, this is a spiritual problem, and there's only spiritual solutions ultimately. We need to thoroughly evangelize and disciple the Middle East. Now, you've got to understand the Middle East conflicts in the context of missions. In missions, we speak about the 1040 window. It's missionary shorthand for the most neglected, needy mission fields in the world. So if you look at a map and you look at the 10th degree latitude, Northern Hemisphere, to the 40th degree latitude in Northern Hemisphere, that 1040 window, in that area stretching from the Atlantic Ocean across North Africa, the Middle East and South Central Asia to the Pacific, in that 1040 window between the 10th and the 40th degree latitude Northern Hemisphere, you have most of the population of the world, over 4 billion people, and most of them are not Christians. You've got most of the Muslim world, the Buddhist world, the Hindu world, most of the Communist Party of China in the 10th to the 40th degree latitude northern hemisphere. So in the North Africa, Middle East, South Central Asia area, you've got most of the wars, most of the terrorism, most of the persecution church, most of the problems in the world, the least amount of freedom, the highest human suffering index, and you've got the least amount of missionary workers in that area. So where the church is doing the least, you've got most of the world's problems, which should make sense. And I believe that's the biggest problem. The reason why the Middle East is full of intractable conflicts is because we've allowed the birthplace of the Christian church to become the backwater, most neglected part of the church. Bear in mind, Syria, which was recently betrayed into the hands of real jihadist, lunatic savages and started to murder Christians. Syria is where believers were first called Christians, at Antioch, which is in what today is Syria. And to think that the Middle East is today an area which is the worst area in the world. But the church started there, but it failed, and then it was chased out, persecuted out by Islam. And there's so few Christians in the Middle East, it boggles the brain, but there's so few missionaries there either. And so when the church is doing the least to evangelize and disciple, we shouldn't be surprised to have most of the world's problems. So I believe the solution is not to bomb them, but to bombard them with prayer. Not to send in the Marines, but to send in the missionaries. Not to hate them, but to love them. They're coming to us maybe with bombs and terrorism. Have we ever gone to them with the gospel? And I believe the best way to undermine the work there is not with bombs, but with Bibles. We need to get the word of God into the Middle East. And when the church is doing more evangelism, and when the areas there are receiving much more gospel input and more prayer, I think we'll start to see this problem resolved. So, for example, right now, there are millions of Christians in Iran, but Iran is a population of over 80 million population. So, just Tehran alone is over 7 million people. And to think that the people in the United States talk about, let's nuke Tehran. Well, do you know how many hundreds of thousands of Christians are there right now? There might be 1 million Christians just in Tehran. And why would you want to nuke any city? It reminds us again that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were the two main centers of Christianity in Japan. And those two nuclear bombs crippled the work of missions in Japan. I don't know how many people even know that and how many care. But we've got a growing church in the Middle East, particularly in Iran. Iran is one of two countries with the fastest growing church in the world right now. So it would be catastrophic for us to interfere with this. I think it would be so much better to see this as first and foremost a missionary challenge. How many missionaries has your church sent to the Middle East? Do you have any missionaries in Iran? How much have you prayed for Iran? Before we talk about let's bomb them, how about talking about how much can we bless them? What more can we do to ensure that Bibles go to Iran? What more can we do to support missions and evangelism in Iran? Are there churches in Iran that we could have relationships with and encourage and pray for and have a partnership or brother-sister relationship? And I do believe that if we would invest more in evangelism, this conflict could go away fairly quickly. When Iran becomes a majority Christian population, everything will change. And I'd say that's also true with China. At this moment, by the way, the church is on track for being the majority religion in China before the end of the century. So the way things are going, Christians are multiplying dramatically in China, not only through demographics, because the average atheist family is having 1 or less children. The average Christian family is having 3 or more children. And so present trends continuing, plus evangelism, we're going to see China becoming overwhelmingly Christian. Isn't that a better investment in the future than thinking, let's go to war with them and bomb them, and of course they're going to bomb us? When the enemy's in range, so are you. And those who take up the sword perish by the sword. It's vital that we think of the world's problems as not just looking at the symptoms, but think of the root causes. And the root cause is these places are not submitted to Christ, they're not discipled. We haven't fulfilled the Great Commission there. The church is failing to fully evangelize and disciple the Middle East, and that's why we're having these problems.
How can we positively and practically respond to this escalating crisis, Dr. Hammond?
Well, through evangelism and prayer would be the beginning. My people are destroyed from lack of knowledge. Information is part of it. But we also need to pray. We are told to pray without ceasing. We are to lift up the nations before the Lord, to make disciples of all nations. So just think of how the Cold War was won. Of course, Bible smuggling, Bible teaching, evangelism behind the Iron Curtain, underground churches, all played a key role. Gospel radio played a key role. Operation Free Europe, broadcasting the gospel into Eastern Europe. But ultimately, there was this 7-year Jericho prayer march where the persecuted church launched this campaign to pray for 7 years, focused on bringing down the Iron Curtain, bringing down the Berlin Wall, collapsing the Soviet Union, opening up the whole of Eastern Europe to the gospel. And it was spectacularly successful. Launched in 1982 with the Leipzig prayer meeting. The symbol was the candle. People would come to these prayer meetings with unlit candles. And then one candle would be lit and all the others would be lit from that one candle. And people would go home and open the curtains in a dining room or lounge and they'd plant the candle on the windowsill, all the lights in the home out. So you'd go through the neighborhood and you could see these silent witnesses to the power of prayer. And they chose the candle because not all the darkness can put out the single candle. Light is more powerful than darkness. Truth is more powerful than lies. And the gospel of Christ is more powerful than all the lies of atheism and communism. So we saw Eastern Europe open up to the gospel and the Cold War come to an end to a large extent because of the Bible smuggling, the Bible distribution, the persecuted churches, the home churches, and the campaign of the 7-year Jericho prayer march. Perhaps we should be launching some kind of 7-year Jericho prayer focus on the Middle East. Imagine if a country like Iran could be won to Christ. I mean, what a ripple effect that would be throughout the Middle East. This, I think, is the solution. A concerted movement of prayer and of evangelism.
Where can listeners learn more about Islam in general and the Middle East in particular, Dr. Hammond?
Well, I wrote the book Slavery, Terrorism and Islam, The Historical Roots and Contemporary Threat, one of our most successful books. It's been through multiple printings, and the third edition was 3 times larger than the first edition, which received a death threat fatwa for me, and we've got that in the back of the book even. There's a lot of appendixes, and one of them is about how I got death threats from Muslim extremists because of the publication of the first edition of this book, and even death threats from the Sudan government, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, saying you should expect to be shot on sight. You should expect to be bombed every time you come to Sudan because your writings make you an enemy of the state. And we've gotten so much good reaction and negative reaction to the Slavery, Terrorism, Islam book. It's been continually out of print and we've had to reprint it over and over again. This is now available as a print on demand, as an ebook as well. Slavery, Terrorism, Islam, the Historical Roots and Contemporary Threat. This includes a lot of the history, a lot of the teachings of the Quran, and it includes how to evangelize Muslims. It's got Muslim evangelism workshop manual material in. It explains the contemporary situation as well as the historical situation and how we can win Muslims to Christ, which is definitely one of the most important things we can do. So understanding Islam, that's part of it. You can also go onto our website, frontlinemissionsa.org, and we've got links on there for Muslim evangelism resources, including video resources, audio resources, and links to the Message of Nabi Isa website. In Islam, Jesus is called Isa, and he's called a prophet, Nabi. So Nabi is prophet, Isa is Jesus in Arabic. So the Message of Nabi Isa.org is a website particularly designed by our board member and veteran missionary, Gerard Niels of Life Challenge Africa. He spent his lifetime studying Islam and working out how to reach Muslims for Christ. And he's put an ideal presentation of the gospel in a way that Muslims can understand in their terminology on this website. And there's an audio, there's a video, there's Bibles that can be downloaded in Arabic and English if you go onto the Message of NabiIsa.org. So that helps. And then there's the Operation World book, the Definitive Prayer Guide to Every Nation on Earth by Jason Mandrake and Patrick Johnson. And Operation World it's got chapters in every country in the world that we can pray through this book, and it's so informative in every single country in the world, including Iran. It's got definitive chapters. So I recommend Operation World and the Mess of Nabi Isa website, and of course also own book of Slavery, Terrorism, and Islam.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Hammond, for putting the situation in America and the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran into context. I'd like to close by reading from Matthew 5, verse 9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. Thank you very much for joining us for From the Frontline. God bless and good night.